I decided it was time to share my steps to create the best possible Detroit-style pizza. You can do this with a standard kitchen oven or pizza oven, but my trick is to par-bake the dough. I use this exact recipe every time to achieve crumbs like this and crusts like this, golden in color rather than burnt. Let's get started. The first thing we need is a high-quality bread flour. I personally use King Arthur. We also need some instant dry yeast, a fine-grained salt, and cold water. The final dough hydration will be 73%. As for equipment, a stand mixer with a dough hook attachment, a food scale, preferably one that can weigh to the 1/10 of a gram, and last, but certainly not least, a Detroit pan. They come in a variety of sizes, but this recipe is for the standard 10 by 14 inch pan, which is the middle-sized one here. These are my absolute favorite pans by the company Lloydpans. It has a really great non-stick coating that's safe at temperatures up to 700 degrees. First up, measure out 255 grams of cold filtered water. Toss it in the microwave for 30 seconds. This should result in a temperature between 80 to 90 degrees Fahrenheit, which is perfect for kickstarting fermentation. We'll measure out 3.5 grams of instant dry yeast and then mix it into the water. Grab 10 grams of salt and 350 grams of bread flour, and then mix it into the bowl of a stand mixer. Now we're ready to make the dough. Using a dough hook or paddle attachment, and while on medium speed, add the wet yeast mixture to the flour. Stop the mixer to scrape the flour off the sides if needed. Continue mixing on medium speed with the dough hook until it forms a smooth and elastic dough, about 5 minutes. Remember, since this is a pretty wet dough, the bottom may stick to the bowl. Scrape it up with a spatula if needed, but don't worry too much since we're about to hand knead it. Scrape the dough out of the bowl and onto the counter. We want to briefly knead the dough and shape it into a ball for a short rest to strengthen the gluten. The dough will be very sticky, so you can either wet your hands before handling or use a bit of olive oil. A dough scraper will also come in handy here. Pick the dough up and fold it in on itself, always keeping the top of the dough visible. Do this about 10 to 15 times before forming it into an oval shape. Grab your Detroit pan and grease it up with a stick of butter or a little bit of olive oil. Now we can place the dough into the pan, cover it, and let it rest for 30 minutes. After the short rest, we need to stretch the dough out to fit the pan. Use the tips of your fingers to gently press and pull the dough towards the edges. The dough may retract a bit, and that's okay. Just cover it and give it another 30-minute rest before stretching it again. Now we can cover it and place it in the refrigerator to cold ferment for 1 to 2 days. On bake day, take the dough out of the fridge for a minimum of 3 hours and a max of 7 hours. Pan fermentation is very forgiving, so you can go a bit longer than you would for a regular pizza and still have a great end result. I like to target 5 hours, and I gently push down the dough with my fingertips halfway through. This helps to develop a better crumb. Now we're ready to make the pizza. Like I mentioned earlier, par-baking the dough is my secret tip. This step allows the edge cheese to cook a shorter amount of time, finishing at a golden color rather than black and charred. It also shrinks the dough 1/8 of an inch on all sides, so more cheese can fall down into the pan edges, making the tall crust. We'll par-bake for 5 minutes in a 550 degree Fahrenheit kitchen oven, or about 3 minutes in a 700 degree Fahrenheit pizza oven. Place the pan on a preheated pizza stone or steel if you have one. If you don't, you want to par-bake the dough on the bottom of the oven itself so it's in direct contact with the heat. Use a metal spatula to check the progress of the bottom crust. We want a light golden color at this stage. Now we can continue with our cheese. I like to use a mix of 70% low-moisture whole milk mozzarella and 30% Monterey Jack cheese. Alternatively, you can go the authentic route and use brick cheese, but can be hard to come by. I sometimes switch it up and use cheddar on the edges, which resembles a Cheez-It flavor. Here's the difference in final crust between mozzarella and cheddar. While the pan is still really hot, carefully add the shredded mozzarella cheese, ensuring to pile it up on the edges. Then add the Monterey Jack. At this point, you can add your sauce on top for the final bake, but I much prefer adding sauce at the end. Toss the hot pan back into the oven and onto the stone for another 6 to 7 minutes, or 4 to 5 minutes with pizza ovens. If you're using the bottom of the oven trick, You'll have to judge it based on the color of your crust from the Parbake. Some ovens are hotter than others, so it's possible to burn the bottom. If I'm not using a stone, I'll bake it for another 3 minutes on the bottom and then move it up to a rack for the final 3 to 4 minutes. After the bake, take it out of the oven and let the pizza sit in the hot pan for 3 minutes. Then, using a metal spatula, separate the cheese crust from the pan, remove the pizza, and set it on a wire rack. Now I'm topping it with 2 large strips of freshly made sauce, consisting of San Marzanos, garlic, and oregano simmered for 30 minutes just to thicken it up a bit. Top it off with some Parmesan and basil, and this is what we get. Everything cooked to perfection from top to bottom. A golden crust, not burned. And a dough that has a beautiful focaccia-like bite to it. Use this recipe sparingly, or else you may find yourself eating Detroit-style pizza daily.